Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast, a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet.
Hello, I'm John Johnson. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm going to be talking about the stress of sex. The stress of sex. We talk about how rewarding it is, how good it's supposed to feel, and it's pervasive. It's in advertising, the clothes we wear, the colors we put on, the combinations of things, the scents we wear. Everything is designed in general to create some sort of attraction. And one of the underlying things about attraction is that sexual tension. It doesn't have to be overt because we know that when we see it, but there's a lot of undercurrent of sexual tension in things. And it affects all of us. That's kind of how it is. Why? Because we are wired for this. And there are people who are very, very clever at marketing these kinds of things to us. And they want to curry favor with us because they have something to sell. That's okay. If there's something out there that you want, you buy it, make use of it. And then sometimes just through the power of suggestion, that subliminal thing, and it's in commercials, it's in advertising, it can be in the music. It's very, very stressful. All of this. I mean, think about it. When we talk about sex, it's intimate, and then sometimes it's not. And when it's not intimate, then it seems like, oh my gosh, you've had bad sex. Or there's a reason to be upset by that. Maybe your friend is having great sex. They love talking about it, but you feel like what you're experiencing isn't so grand. So what happens for you? You become very disillusioned. You're wondering, well, does your partner really love you? Do they care about you? They don't make as much of an effort as you do. And because of that, you're disappointed. You want something different. You want something better than what you're experiencing because you feel, I mean, based on what you've heard, your friends are having better sex than you are. Every article out there, read the magazines. It's how to have better sex, how to have more sex. If you're not having any, these are the reasons. See your doctor. Maybe you're having an emotional breakdown. I think there's all kinds of reasons why whatever's happening is happening. They tell you that there's got to be a reason to it. It can't just be no reason. There has to be a reason. There's a reason for everything. That's what they tell us. And if you don't find a cause to your reason, then there's something wrong with you. Again, that's what they tell us. It's stressful. Sex is stressful. Being romantic, being intimate, thinking about it, trying to come up with something new. It's challenging because when it comes to thinking of something new, you generally think about, okay, there's something else I have to buy. What can I buy that's going to make my sex life better? Do I have to buy a book? Do I have to buy a certain food? And you see how this thing just becomes exponential. And where does it stop? It doesn't. There's always something different, something new around the corner. There's books in the library. There's books in the bookstore. There's articles on the internet. There's this show. Now, my show, I try to make you think. I try to give you an option, some other considerations that suggest, okay, you are not a failure. You are a human being. You are having an experience. And I want you to be where you are so that you can take stock of what's happening around you. I want you to feel good about yourself. That's one of the reasons why I do this podcast. I try to share information that I think is valuable, something that you can utilize, something that you can share, and even better yet, bring your friends, bring your partner to this podcast. That way, you guys can both hear it together and you can talk about what you're experiencing, what you think, what ideas come up because you are in the thought process of how this is affecting you. And when you have your partner there, you can discuss with each other what's happening for you in this experience. Are you having sex that you're satisfied with? And if you are, that's okay. If your partner is not, okay, it's an opportunity to talk about it. That's not a bad thing. Just think of it this way. If you're in conversation about it, that's a good thing. It's when people don't want to have conversations that can be stressful because you're feeling what? You feel left out. You feel unsatisfied. And we talk about this to the degree that that's why there are so many books. That's why there's so many ideas. There are retreats. There are couples retreats. There are classes about human sexuality. And is it the medication? Is it what we're eating? Is it the fact we're drinking too much? Are you smoking? Something that affects your ability to perform or your libido. Is something happening emotionally? You don't care about me. Or maybe you care too much. What is it? All of this stuff is stressful. How do we navigate these things? Well, one of the first things to understand about yourself is that you are feeling stressed. When you can actually identify that and not just blow it off, but I mean really acknowledge to yourself that I'm feeling stressed by this. I'm feeling overwhelmed. That's good for you because that's a determination that you get to make. And based on what you discover following that can help uncover some of the things we can do to make stress less or make sex less stressful for you. Boy, that's a tongue twister. To make sex less stressful for you. We really get caught up in orgasms. We get caught up in all of the joy we're told we're supposed to experience around sex. I mean, I think it's a good caught up. I think we're supposed to enjoy it. It's part of the human experience. It's when we don't is when we start to worry. We start to worry about ourselves. We start to worry about our partner. We feel like we don't match up or we don't measure up because we hear about how our friends are enjoying it, or you might even be amongst a group of people who talk about how they don't enjoy it and they just check out. And how unfortunate is that? If it's something that you have enjoyed at some point in time in your life and you feel just overwhelmed with frustration and you just want to check out, that's disappointing. Because I think the root to that is you really do want to be engaged, but maybe you've tried to navigate these challenges and you just haven't been successful at it. And rather than endure more frustration, you just say, I'm done with it. Well, I think that could be a big disappointment between you and your partner. Or maybe the stress of it is you don't have a partner and you've had a hard time finding one. It's quite varied. There are lots of things that happen in life. There are lots of these scenarios. And maybe you've experienced every one of those. Well, what I'm here to talk about is try to find solutions to those very things that I've talked about, that I've just mentioned in that long list, and really get you to learn to celebrate yourself and acknowledge where you are in life at this moment. And that you can make a difference. You have to engage, have to be thoughtful, have to ask what I call or critical thinking questions so that we can come to a reasonable conclusion about some of the steps that you can take to make it not only less stressful, but enjoyable, something that you look forward to. I think a lot of us look forward to having fulfilling sex, but we may be challenged by, and not just knowledge, because there's plenty of places to get the knowledge, but we might be challenged by the simple fact that we are just stressed by it all. I'm going to take a break and I'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast, and I'm talking about the stress of sex. And one of the real challenges about dealing with the stress of it all is it affects you. So the challenge is, say, you can't hide behind it. You can't hide behind the fact that you are stressed, because it's in your eyes. It's in how you handle somebody, they're in the conversation, how you caress them. People read body language fairly quickly. I mean, gather that intimacy, being what it is between human beings, is something that we want. When somebody isn't giving that to us, then we search for reasons. We may luck up and come up with the reason right away, or we just start throwing things at the wall, seeing what sticks and getting a reaction. And that just sort of builds the intensity. And again, it adds more to the stress. But here's something that I think affects many people when it comes to the stress of sex. And if you've had, and I say had, because I'm talking in the past tense, at this present moment, let's say your love life isn't what you expect it to be, and you have had good sex, a good relationship, a good intimacy, that sort of thing, then if you're not experiencing it now, it's like you know what you're missing. How do you navigate something like that? How do you emotionally handle the idea that you may have to share some information like this with your partner and them feeling hurt at the revelation? You know, those honest conversations that you have to have with people sometimes, and you just feel like, wow, this isn't going to have a good outcome. So we avoid it. But, remember, we're talking about how stressful this stuff is. I think one of the ways to deal with situations like this in life, okay, you kind of have to take a step back. We have to go to a place and time before all of the trouble starts and develop a way of communicating so that when we have difficult things to talk about, you can talk about them so that you don't sweep them under the rug. A lot of people don't plan that. A lot of people don't think about that when it comes to choosing partners. I mean, they choose people who are exciting to us, who get us energized, but one of the important things when it comes to selecting a partner in life, and I'm talking about whatever it is you do, when it comes to selecting people, you want to find people who know how to have, who can deal with conflict in a way that's constructive. I think we imagine people being very combative when we have difficult conversations to talk about. And because of that, it makes us fearful. It makes us want to avoid having an in-depth, having an honest conversation. I mean, think about it. How many times have you really been willing to have those conversations. It's not easy, especially when you know you're going to hurt somebody, because that's not what you really want to do. And something like this, which we're talking about intimacy, and this is the person you have in your life. This isn't just you're not just being a boss and just passing orders and then telling people what to do. This is going to have an impact on you. Because if this person walks away feeling hurt and dejected, then you're going to have to deal with that part too. And if you haven't had a good experience with it, it's so hard to keep diving into this. Because when pairs of people or couples or groups, and when you're speaking about the group dynamic, when they start having trouble with this, then you need a referee of some type so that we can have an outcome that we can live with. And that's something that's very important when you're dealing with conflict. You have to be willing, you have to understand what it is that you can live with. Because if stirring this stuff up is going to create an outcome that you can't live with, even for yourself, okay, then I almost have to tell you, you've got to take a step back and figure out a way to navigate this. And like I said, a referee, this would be somebody like a counselor, a pastor, somebody who you respect. Because part of what may be happening here is you have to change. So what I'm discussing here in terms of how it operates is how you handle conflict so that when these heavy conversations come up, you have a way, you have a recipe for dealing with it instead of just taking a shot in the dark. And some of the things to know is you have to know things about your partner. Some people don't like when you drag it out. Some people just want to have the conversation right now, and they want to have the facts. They want to be able to deal with it because it stresses them out even more to drag this stuff out. Or the dreaded conversation. The words, we need to talk. That's scary to people. When you lead with something like that, don't do that. If you can break things down into their simplest, their smallest components and handle it a bit at a time, that works. Another thing is, I think, discuss it from the standpoint of being positive. Hey, you know what? We're going to come up with a solution. We're going to work through this. Help people understand where you are when you're dealing with stressful things. Help them feel comfortable and that you really do want a good outcome. Not that you're just going to lay it on them and force them to come up with an answer. I mean, you may be the one that's disappointed in the beginning because you're the one bringing it up, but be willing to be part of the solution. Don't just throw it on other individuals. Just don't throw it on your partner. So that's an important piece of information to have when you're dealing with conflict. Now, I'm going to take it back to, we're talking about the stress of sex. That's how you deal with pretty much any kinds of question. But now, the reason sex is such a hot topic is we live with the fact that it's talked about almost every hour or every minute of every day somewhere. They're selling us that we should be good at it. We should be able to perform like this. We need to wear these clothes. We need to do this and that. So you're bombarded with all of this, and trying to navigate your concerns in the midst of all of this other stuff is really, really difficult. You have to find your center. So you have to cut out all the noise, turn off all the advertisements, put away all the magazines, all the books, all of that, put all that stuff away. You don't even want to see any suggestions of any of that because it's just going to get you all amped up. And you want to be concerned about you and your partner and how you can get some containment on this so that you're not all worked up, so that you feel loving, you feel like there's going to be a good outcome, that we're going to be together, we're going to make love after all of this is over with. I mean, it's a recipe for makeup sex. Anyhow, I'm going to take a break right now, and I'll be right back.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
All right, welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast. I'm John Johnson, talking about the stress of sex. So what I've laid out for you are some scenarios which build up this whole thing about how we're supposed to be, how we're supposed to feel about sex. And then with that brings this weight of a certain amount of responsibility. And because of that, the responsibility / expectations, and then when those aren't met, it's very stressful for us. So I also talked about some solutions, how to approach the subject, ways to be in the presence of your partner so that so that you both feel like you're going to have a positive outcome. You don't necessarily have to know all the answers to things right now, but just having a positive attitude will really help the energy. It'll help the relationship. Because when you're talking about something such as this, it almost feels like, okay, we're adversaries. Because the person who's not satisfied, generally that's the person who brings up the conversation, is telling the person that their partner that they're not satisfied. So then the partner feels like, okay, how have I failed you? Because this is supposed to be something really important. So are you interested in somebody else? Are you having dreams about somebody you were with in the past? What's going on here? See, all of those things run through the minds of people. And that's why being reassuring really helps with having the outcome. And one of the other little topics I pointed out was before you have problems in your relationship, you want to develop a recipe for how to approach and how to deal with things. It's like having a plan for anything else, you know? It's like a little insurance policy. Because when you're in the moment, these things don't necessarily have the best outcome, because if you're just kind of wading your way through it, sometimes you get derailed. You get off track on things that really don't matter. And it goes into other subjects of in the conversation that really have nothing to do with why we're having this talk. So you have to learn to stay focused. And that was another one of the reasons why I said break it down into smaller bits, because you might find a common thread and it might not even be sex at all. Sex might be a symptom of something. That's a very, very important piece of something to know when it comes to problem solving. It's very easy to look at the thing that's staring us right in the face and think that that's the problem, but it certainly may not be. And sex gets a lot of credit in relationships for making them work. And when the sex isn't working, sex gets a lot of credit for making it miserable. And there can definitely be other things that are, there are a lot of outliers that could really be more the cause of the problems. And I can list a few. Medications could be, depression could be one, fatigue, just in general. There could be other family issues. There could be, a death in the family, which is, things like that really, really affect you. And it's hard for the person who's feeling all of those feelings to be intimate. It's a stretch. It really is a stretch. So when you look at the whole person, you can probably find a better reason or a more precise reason as to what's causing the upset in the love life. I'm going to give you a tip here, and this is just about life. Don't compare yourself in your relationship and how things are happening for you with what you hear is going on with somebody else. Because that in and of itself is oftentimes a recipe for disaster, because the way people describe things may not necessarily be the truth. I think what you want to do is like being in competition with yourself. How are you doing? And whatever improvement you make in your situation, that's worth celebrating. If you go to the point of comparing yourself to other people, especially in something like this, rather than looking at it like, and let me use the analogy of a runner who is running a distance. Say they're running a 5K race, and they're comparing, I use the word race. They're comparing themselves to the person next to them. I mean, if you're really, really competitive and you're an athlete and that's what you do for a living, that's one thing. But if you're the person who's out there who's jogging, and the thing that you want to think about is not necessarily competing against the fastest runner out there in the field, but the improvement that you make from the last time you ran. That's more obtainable. And I say that it's very simple in concept, but the reason I say that is you can find more in common with your partner and more to celebrate when the two of you are on that page, rather than you comparing yourself to somebody's story that you heard, because you have an idea in your mind about what you think the other person means. But when you're living it with your partner, you two both have very tangible experiences that you can relate to, and that keeps it in the room. And I say, you don't have to be a voyeur. Be involved. Be connected. And that's so much more authentic, and you get so much more out of that experience, because one of the things that we recognize is when we've gone through something together and we've had some success with it, it encourages us to tackle the next thing. And remember what I said about keeping it small. By keeping it in smaller bites, then it's much more manageable. Emotionally, then that's really important, because quite often that's where the challenge is in any of this. It's really in how you feel. The physical part generally tends to follow the emotions. And I mean that for men and women. And I can give you an example of proof. I know a lot of women say, well, men compartmentalize. All they want is sex. They never really feel emotion. That is patently incorrect. And let me tell you why. One of the things men crave most is feeling respected. When a man feels respected, then he's engaged. And you, as a partner, when you recognize that, you find out how much more available a man will be to you and cater to your needs when he feels respected. So understanding that component about a man really can be key. Now, you may think it's manipulation. I don't in so much think it's manipulation. It's really about understanding who your partner is, what their needs are, and vice versa. To the men who understand what a woman's needs are, then it drives her emotions. See? So anyway, that was my illustration, and what I share with you is obviously my opinion, but I think when you deep down start to examine some of these things and how it operates for you as a person, for your partner, and the relationship that you two have, I think you'll find a lot of truth in it. But ultimately, it's the relationship that the two of you have. Don't compare it to someone else's or the perception that you have about what they say, because that could be a lot of hype. And remember, when I opened this program, I was talking about all the things that we are bombarded with. So, considering all of that, remember the stress of sex. I'm John Johnson, and this is the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From sex and relationships to health and wellness, life and happiness, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast.